Hi guys, the next stage in doing a segmented drum or vase or bowl or whatever is to sand the edges of the rings flat, because even if you've managed to cut all the segments perfectly, get them all the same size and glue them together so that they're all flush, you still usually have a little undulations in the surface. Marks left by the saw, or one segment's maybe sticking up a little bit past the other one. I can feel a little step there. So you need to sand the edges flat before you glue the rings together. And these have all been glued together overnight, so the glue should be set now. And you want to let the glue set for 24 hours before you start sanding, because this puts quite a lot of stress on the joints. But I'm just going to show you how I do this. Now, if you have a drum sander at your disposal, then that would be the best way to do this. It'd be much quicker and easier than sanding them by hand. But as long as you use a nice fresh piece of sandpaper, this is 40 grit, and I've stuck a large area of it down to the worktop here using double-sided tape, and this method works really well. What I normally do is draw a pencil line on the edge of the segments all the way around. Don't know how well you can see that, but there's a pencil mark there. And what you do is you need to sand it until you can't see that line anymore. Now, I've got a couple of other rings here which I'll come on to in a moment, but I'll just show you how I would go about sanding this. So I'm going to sand the edge that I've just put the line on, obviously. So what I would do is hold the ring with two opposite segments and then just sand it back and forward, and count how many strokes you're giving it, so that you can sand the whole thing evenly. And use the whole, this is a fresh piece of sandpaper, so try and use the whole area rather than working in one spot all the time. So. Okay, and turn it and hold the next two segments and do the same number of strokes. And again. And have a look. That's it, perfectly flat. There's no steps anymore, and I've removed all the pencil marks. So that never took very long at all, but it always helps if you get all the segments exactly the same thickness and glue them together accurately, so there's no steps. So I'm quite happy with that. What I'll do now is I'll do the other side, and then I'll use a pair of calipers to actually measure the thickness and make sure it's the same thickness all the way around, and that'll let you know that both surfaces are parallel to each other. If there was maybe one side of the ring was slightly thicker than the other one, then you can just sand it a bit more at the thicker part until you get it even. But if you work with a large area of 40 grit sandpaper, it doesn't take long at all to do it by hand, and it gives you a really good result. What I would normally do now is, it's useful to have a vacuum cleaner to hand, and then just sand off all the dust regularly. going to do now is a much thinner ring. This one's only just over half an inch high. It's about half an inch thick the other way as well. And when you're sanding something like that, it's very difficult to actually do it this way because there's very little to hold on to there, and you end up sanding your fingertips as well. So I have a different method. If you're doing a thin ring like this, what seems to work quite well is if you use a clamp. Got one here. You clamp this thing down to your workbench at one side. Now these pieces are actually finger jointed together. The fact that it rises up a little bit doesn't really matter. Again, I would mark it with a pencil. Now there's some slightly larger steps on this ring because it's finger jointed together and the finger joints weren't perfectly calibrated. Some of the segments are sticking up a little bit past the one next to them, so it may require a little bit more sanding. But what I have here is just a piece of wood with some more sandpaper stuck on one side, and it has a block of wood on the other side. And you can sand it this way as well if you clamp it down. Backwards and forward, or you can go that way. Again, hoover up or clean up all the dust. Rotate it 90 degrees so that the bit where the clamp was is now going to be the bit you hit the most. Put the clamp back on. That's all the pencil line gone, so that's probably pretty flat now. There'll be no steps anywhere. It's always worth checking it on a flat surface just to see if it sits flat, but that's how I would sand a ring if it's quite a thin ring like that, because it's difficult to hold on to. Obviously you need to turn it over and do the other side now, but you can see that that's all sanded really smooth, and that should glue together perfectly. And once you put it with the ring, the other ring, that's the one that I've already done, set the two rings on top. They should go together perfectly without any gaps anywhere. The two pieces should sit perfectly flat on top of each other. So that'll be ready to glue once I've sanded the other side. So I'm just giving you a quick guide to how I would go about it. If you prefer to work with straight segments rather than curved ones, you can do it the same way, but you know, these segments, I mean, the curved ones are only about half an inch thick. This is almost, well, that's 20 mil, so that's about 3/4 of an inch thick, or just over. So you know, that's almost twice the surface area that you need to sand when you work with curved segments, so it's going to take a lot longer, but the same technique still works as long as you have a nice fresh piece of sandpaper to work on. Obviously the the more accurately you glue the segments together. If you do that trick I showed you, squeezing each joint in the vise before you tighten up the strap, there'll be a lot less sanding to do. All the pencil marks are gone, there's no steps. That's another flat ring. A little bit of elbow grease is all it requires. Or you can spend £900 and buy a drum sander if you want, but either way you have to get the rings flat.